Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Rebecca, otherwise known as Hip Knit Hooray Online, and this is podcast episode number 5. It feels a little bit weird to be sitting down and filming this podcast. I feel like I'm a little bit out of the loop, or I don't know, out of practice, even though it's only been maybe a month since I last filmed a podcast. I made my Everything I Knit in 2023 video and then my project planning video. So talking about actual things that I've been working on. I haven't really done that in a little bit, so I'm excited to just jump in now. I have a few finished objects and not as many whips. In my last podcast episode, I had mentioned that I'm really trying to clear off the needles for the new year, just because I had a few projects that I was working on for a few months, the ones that I finished today. So I just kind of wanted a clean slate. So yeah, probably for my next podcast episode, look out for some new cast-ons. So yeah, let's just get started with finished objects. The first finished object I have to share today is my Frankie Genser. This is a sweater I've been working on for a few months now. It's from the 2202 pattern booklet from Sandnes Garn. There's two versions of the Frankie sweater in the book. There's one that is a heavier weight or gauge. It uses Sandnes Garn Kos, and this one uses their, I believe it's called alpaca Borsk or Borsk alpaca. It's a lighter weight brushed alpaca. So I did that lighter weight version, but I held it with one strand of fingering weight wool. So the yarn that I use, I don't really have any to share because I used almost all of the yarn that I have. I only had like little remnants, which I didn't keep. So I don't have the yarn to share in skein form, but I used CaMaRose Yaku, which is a 100% superwash merino wool in the shade Lysbla. I initially used this yarn for a previous project. I had knit the I had knit the Stockholm sweater V-neck from Petite Knit, but as I mentioned, this is a superwash wool yarn, and the sleeves grew a ton after blocking, and to the point where I just couldn't really wear it without rolling up the sleeves. So it just wasn't very practical. And I also held it with a very scratchy, kind of low quality mohair. It was from the brand Elise, but it was only like a very small amount of mohair and silk, and the rest was, I'm not really sure what it was. It was some sort of like synthetic fiber, and it was very prickly and scratchy. So I ended up frogging that sweater and then reclaimed the yarn. Took out all of the mohair when I frogged it, so I was just left with the fingering weight Yaku. So I knit this smaller gauge version, but I sized down to 3.5 millimeter needles because I was working with a fingering weight wool, and to account for that, I knit a size medium. So this is it here. There's no like suggested ease or intended suggested ease in the pattern. They just show what the finished bust circumference will be, so you kind of have to just gauge that based off of your own preference. It is meant to be oversized, but yeah, they don't really specify. The size medium in the pattern has a finished bust circumference of 139 centimeters, but since I sized down to 3.5 millimeter needles, my finished bust for the sweater is a little bit smaller than that, but it's still pretty oversized, or quite oversized, I would say, for me. I really enjoyed the construction of this. It is a top-down saddle shoulder. Last year I was trying to knit a few saddle shoulder constructions to see which one worked for me, because I realized that I do like that fit. So this one is knit top-down, and it's all contiguous. So you're working the saddle shoulder piece here at the same time as you're doing the increases to shape the neckline, also the sleeves, and then the body as well. The fit of this saddle shoulder is a little bit wider than other ones I've worked before. It looks like this here. So you shape all of this with increases, and then the neckline here is shaped with increases as well. There's no short rows that are worked in this pattern. So you can see like there's a little bit of a line here, like right here, which is the increases. And I was worried about this garment because the neckline before blocking was very tight around my neck up here, and then I was noticing there was some bunching like around the shoulders, and then a little bit at the back as well. So I wasn't really sure how it was going to fit. I wasn't sure if it was like my needle size or my gauge, so I decided to do a mid-project block with this sweater. I never really did it before, but I'm thinking that it's definitely going to be the way to go for me in the future, because it really does impact how the garment fits, and it can impact how you make modifications in the future, like whether or not you want to do more increases for a better fit, or the length of the garment. So I'll definitely keep doing mid-project blocks. I did that for this sweater, and the neckline really opened up. Or I did stretch out the neckline quite a bit after blocking, but it opened up quite well. And the shoulders as well fit a lot more nicely around the shoulders and the underarm. So that worked out really well to do that block. And I did do a few modifications. So the first modification that I did, because I was worried about that neckline, is I did a stretchy bind off for the neckline. I followed the stretchy bind off instructions in Ozetta's patterns. I think it might be part of the paid for pattern because I didn't see the technique available online, but if you can just search up different techniques for a stretchier bind off, you could probably just use one of those, but I would recommend that because the neckline is a little bit tighter or sits higher up on your neck. The second modification that I did is I adjusted the body length. So in the pattern, they mention it in the pattern, but it is like a little bit unclear about the instructions I found personally, but I extended the length of the body by 10 centimeters before working the ribbing. So in the pattern, you are meant to knit, in the pattern, you're meant to knit 10 centimeters before you start your ribbing. And that's because if you look at the product or pattern photos, the twisted rib along the body hem is really long. And I didn't really want that because I wanted to work a split hem. So what I did is I knit the body and stockinette 10 centimeters longer before doing the half twisted rib for the body hem. And I shortened that in half. So instead of 18 centimeters, I did 9 centimeters. And then I did the split hem here. The split hem instructions, I followed the instructions from the Abby Genser pattern, which is another pattern by Sandnes Garn in another pattern booklet. The Abby Genser has a very similar fit to the Frankie Genser, but it has stripes. I would say it has a little bit more of a boxy fit, and there is a split hem. So I just followed those pattern instructions. I would say though that to work that split hem, it was very similar to how I've done it in the past from other designers. So it wasn't anything like revolutionary or groundbreaking. You just have one edge stitch on either end, and then you are slipping that stitch purlwise, and then you knit that edge stitch at the end of the round to get more of a clean finish to your split hem. So I did that for both the front and the back, the split hem with the edge stitch, and as I mentioned, it was 9 centimeters before I did the tubular bind off. So that was another modification that I did. And the third modification is I adjusted the sleeve length, but I adjusted it after the fact, and I actually had to cut into my work and graft it together at the end in order to get that length. But maybe I'll explain the whole process now. So in the pattern, you are supposed to knit your sleeve length. They provide us a specified sleeve length and before you start working the 18 centimeters of twisted rib. And so I did that for one of the sleeves, and then I tried on the project, and I thought the sleeves were just a little bit too short. It was kind of around like my wrist bone, maybe a little bit higher, so around bracelet length. And when I was looking at the product photos, it does drop down quite far on the model to be like almost at her fingertips. And so I was like, mine is looking a little bit short, and I knew that it was going to grow with blocking, but what I've been finding is a lot of my sleeves have been shrinking quite a bit with wear. Like I will initially block the sweater and it'll be like a nice length. I do like my sleeves to be a little bit longer, so it'll be like kind of at your fingertips or like mid palm. But over time, my sleeves have been shrinking with wear, I guess, and increasing, and a lot of them have now ended like before my hand at my wrist. And so I knew that that might happen in the future with this pattern. So I figured I might as well just knit the sleeve a little bit longer first. And so what I did was I left the stitch markers here to show the length that I extended it to. So I had already knit the twisted rib for the sleeves, and I did not want to work another 18 centimeters of twisted rib again. So I searched up how to graft, how to cut into your work and graft pieces together afterwards, because I had seen Leslie of Knit California do that for, I think it was her Oslo sweater. She wanted to adjust the length of the body of the sweater to be shorter, whereas I wanted to make the sleeve a little bit longer, but it would have been the same technique regardless. So basically you insert some lifelines and then you cut into your work. I won't explain how to do it because there's tutorials online that explain it a lot better, but essentially you cut into your work, but you make sure that you have the live stitches on either side on some sort of scrap yarn or knitting needle, and then you can just start working from that piece. And so I knit another 9 centimeters of stockinette before grafting it together here in the round to connect the ribbing back onto the sleeve. And I followed a really great tutorial. I followed the tutorial from the Chili Dog. I really like their YouTube channel, and I think the way that they explain knitting techniques is really well done. So I grafted it close here, and I made sure to do it close to the ribbing where I cut into my work initially, just in case there was any issues with the way that I Kitchener stitched together the garment, if there's like any tensioning issues. Or you'll see here like the beginning and end of where I Kitchener stitched, there's like, it's not super noticeable, but there's a little bit of a jog there. So by it being closer to the ribbing, I hope it's a little bit less noticeable. So yeah, I just made sure it was close to this ribbing. And now the sweater fits a lot better on me. I'm really happy with all of these modifications. The sleeves did grow to be quite long, but like I said, I'm accounting for the shrinkage in the future. And overall, I'm really happy with the project. Let's do a little bit of a recap of my final thoughts. So in terms of the yarn, I'm really happy with the CaMaRose Yaku yarn. This was the second time that I've used this yarn because I had previously used this yarn in another project before frogging it. So I was already familiar with how it worked, but I hadn't used it before, it just held on its own. I really like the finished gauge of just holding one fingering weight yarn. It kind of reminds me of a lot of summer tanks that I have done, summer tanks and tops, and I really like it. I think I'm going to try this for the future. It has like a really nice drape to it. It's very comfortable to wear as a lighter layer, and it has a little bit of heathering to it, which I think add a lot of dimension when you're just using one strand of yarn. That's the reason why I really like using mohair, because of the dimension that the mohair can add to a project. But with the heathering, I think, yeah, it looks really nice on its own. I find that when you do use a solid color version, sometimes I do really like the look, but it can look a little bit flat, I guess. So the heathering adds some nice detail to the project, and the yarn is pretty affordable. I purchased this yarn from the Knitting Loft. I don't see it anymore listed on their website, so I don't know if they carry it anymore. I don't think the yarn is discontinued, but it is a little bit more difficult to source where I live now. I haven't really seen any more local yarn stores carry it for me. So I may not use it in the future just because of the accessibility of trying to purchase the yarn, but it is relatively affordable. I got 6 balls of yarn from the Knitting Loft, and at the time they were $10. So this project cost me $60 in total to make. So I would say like pretty affordable for a 100% wool sweater. So yeah, really happy with the yarn. In terms of the pattern, I have some mixed feelings about it. So I really like all of Sandnes Garn's designs and patterns. I think they're all really well thought out. They're really classic, elegant, super wearable, but the way that the pattern is written is very concise. I don't know if, from what I heard, Norwegian pattern writing can be a little bit more brief or concise. And it might also be the fact that their patterns are only printed and not available online. So like maybe it's a paper thing, I don't know, to like save space. To put it in perspective, the pattern is 2 pages long, and there's no like images or schematics in the pattern or links to video tutorials or anything like that. So they don't really explain a lot of the construction as you would see in a lot of downloadable PDF files, I would say. Yeah, there's no images or schematics, and they also use a lot of abbreviations, and abbreviations where I don't think that they're like super intuitive if you haven't been knitting before. Like I wrote down a few abbreviations that I thought were like a little bit funny. They used, instead of measured, they use an abbreviation for that. They use an abbreviation for needle. They use an abbreviation for stockinette stitch, and they aren't, like, I wouldn't say explicitly listed. So if you didn't have that much knitting experience before, I think it would be kind of hard to follow along. And even the way that the markers are placed, I don't know, it's just not the most intuitive or beginner friendly. So I do like all of the Sandnes Garn patterns that are available, but I would just say, like, be careful or just go into the project knowing that they're not going to be holding your hand or explaining each detail, which I sometimes can appreciate, but I still think it's worth it to be able to knit the pattern, because I really do like the finished object. But I'll just know that for the future, maybe for like some more challenging Sandnes Garn patterns, that there might be a little bit more self-guided learning that I'll have to do while working those patterns. The next finished object that I have to share today is my Freehand Candyland scarf. So I think at my last podcast, I had left with starting the red. So I had worked around this much of the scarf, but it's now doubled in length, and I have added all 5 colors. So the yarn that I used was Hobbii Friends Extra Fine Merino, which is 100% superwash merino wool, and it is 165 meters for every 50 grams. So I would say it's like a heavier weight fingering, like almost sport. And I used 6 colors for this project. I'll link them all down below, the color names, but I used this chartreuse green, this tan color, tomato red, pink, and then this light turquoise blue color. So this was yarn that was sent to me from Hobbii for their Candyland challenge, and I decided that I wanted to freehand a scarf just because I wanted to have like an oversized scarf and try to experiment with color work. So I have already mentioned this in previous podcast episodes, but what I did was I knit a color block of each color. And when I had around 7 grams left of that yarn, I started doing the 1x1 color work, which is 7 rounds of 1x1 simple color work with the main color and then this cream color, before doing another 7 rounds of the next main color and that cream. So in total, this is 14 rounds of 1x1 color work with a color block in between. And I did that between each of the color blocks. And it was a really fun process to experiment with pairing different colors together, trying out like a very simple color work technique. It's all 1x1, so there wasn't really anything charted I needed to do. But it was a really fun process. For the scarf, I knit the entire scarf with 3.5 millimeter needles, but for the color work, I sized up to 4 millimeter needles because I heard with color work, your gauge can tend to be a little bit tighter because you have that like small float, I guess, in between each of the color work changes. So to account for that, I just sized up. Sorry, I have some like fluff or dust on it already. And yeah, really happy overall with the piece. I will mention I did have some challenges with blocking the garment. So let's chat about the sizing and the fit of the scarf and how that impacted the blocking. So like I said, I wasn't following a pattern, it was freehand, so I was kind of just going off of the store-bought scarves and wraps that I already had in my wardrobe for the proportions. I wanted the scarf to be about 25 centimeters in width. So I cast on 156 stitches, and I wasn't really sure about the length, so I just knit till I had 7 grams left, and that ended with each color block being around 45 to 47 centimeters. They all kind of varied a little bit, I'm guessing, with tension, because it is a very long scarf. Yeah, the tension between different color blocks changed a little bit. So yeah, 45 to 47 centimeters in length. So after I finished the piece, I was a little bit worried about how it was going to grow after blocking, because I knew this was superwash merino, and I've used superwash merino in the past, so like I have a little bit of an understanding of how much something might grow, but I was not I was not prepared for how much this scarf was going to grow. So before blocking, this scarf was almost 200 centimeters or 2 meters in length. And I didn't really want it to grow anymore, but I wouldn't mind if it grew a little bit more in width. But after blocking, or right after blocking, the scarf grew 45 centimeters in length. Each color block was around 57 centimeters. So I was a little bit concerned after that. I had laid out the piece on my blocking mat. I had to use a ton of blocking pins. I borrowed my sister's blocking pins as well, because the scarf was just so substantial and so long. And so I blocked the piece and tried to really limit how much it was going to grow while putting it into a shape that I was happy with. So once the wrap dried, it did shrink a little bit. So now it's 30 centimeters longer post blocking, and in total the scarf is 265 centimeters in length. And I was a little bit worried or scared about the final fit of the garment, because I didn't want the ends of the scarf to like reach my knees or like my ankles. So I was a little bit worried, and it does when I just put the scarf on like this, of course, with it being that long. But what I found is it actually works really well to wrap around my neck 2 times, and that wasn't really the initial plan. Just wanted to wrap it around once, or fold the scarf in half and then loop it through and wear it like that. But actually I'm really happy with how it's fitting now, because it is a lot more loftier and warmer when I wear it like this. So actually, if the scarf wasn't long enough, I wouldn't be able to do this, and I probably wouldn't have worn it as much because it would have been less warm. So I'm actually really happy with how it turned out. I really like the 1x1 colorwork changes. I think it's really fun as a transition between all of the color blocks. And yeah, it was a really fun experiment, and it makes me want to try knitting colorwork more in the future. So I do want to touch on the yarn. I have already mentioned before that I was a little bit disappointed with the quality of the yarn. There were, I would say, about half the skeins had a significant amount of knots in the ball. So each ball of yarn is 165 meters, and within that, I would say like I expect there to maybe be a knot in a ball of yarn that's that long. Like I guess it happens in the winding process. So I'm not disappointed if there's usually like 1 or 2 knots, but some of them had like 5, 6 knots in it, and you ended up needing to break your work quite a few times and then join the yarn again. So that was a little bit disappointing in terms of the quality. I wouldn't say all of them were like that, but a decent amount for me to definitely notice it and probably not use this yarn in the future. I do have some scraps from this project, so I probably will use that for a scrappy project in the future, but I wouldn't go out and purchase this yarn again. And now moving on to whips. So the first whip I wanted to share is my sweater number 14 V-neck, which is a pattern by My Favorite Things Knitwear. I knit the sweater number 14 before, but this is my first time working the V-neck version, and as you'll see, we have a collar. So I always like to do this with garments. I just add the collar as soon as I knit a few centimeters of the body in the round. I just think it really completes the piece, and it just looks nice. Like I get more excited while working it when I see that. I think when I had last left off, I had knit the back and then the front panels, but I hadn't joined in the round yet. So since then, I've joined in the round, knit the few centimeters of the body, added the collar, and I'm now working on the sleeves. I think I'm gonna have enough yarn for the project, but yeah, I just wanted to get the sleeves out of the way first, just in case I do run out of yarn at the end. I'll just make it a little bit more of a crop sweater. For the yarn, I am using Lion Brand Wool Ease in the shade Linen, held together with Drops Kid Silk in the shade Light Beige. The Lion Brand Wool Ease is a wool and acrylic blend. It's majority acrylic. I don't remember off the top of my head the exact composition. I think it's like 85% acrylic, 15% merino. So it is majority acrylic. You do feel like a little bit of the wool content, but like I mentioned before, what I do like doing when I use a wool acrylic blend is holding it with a strand of mohair. I just think it creates like a nicer finished fabric and really elevates that blend. So yeah, that's what I like doing whenever I use that type of fiber blend. And for the sizing, I am knitting in between a size 1 and 2. So I mentioned in my last podcast, I did the increases at the bottom to achieve the size 2 ease around the body, but cast on with size 1 stitch count, so I would get a bit of a tighter fit around my shoulders. And so far, I'm really liking that modification that I did. I will say though that in the future, I might try and work those increases with a little bit more of like a decorative edge. I had one edge stitch before doing those increases at the front and the back, but what I think I will do in the future is have like a 3 or 4 stitch edge to the front and back to have like a little bit more of a decorative edge, because it's pretty subtle and maybe like only I can notice it, but where I've picked up for the sleeve, it was a little bit hard to get a clean finish. I think it looks okay now, but there were like some holes here just because there wasn't a ton of finishing here to, yeah, just get like more of a clean finish. I'll pull my Lakes pullover, which I ended up doing that, and I think it just looks better. You'll see here I had like a 3 or 4 stitch edge here to get a nicer finish for the sleeve. I just think it looks better. Maybe I can try and put them together. It's not really a big deal. I just think in the future I would do that just so it looks a little bit nicer. I don't know if you'll be able to tell. Is that helpful? I don't really know if you'll be able to tell, but yeah, I would just do that in the future. That's the only thing, but I'm not going to go back because I already started the sleeve. But other than that, I'm just working away on the sweater. Hopefully by the next podcast, I'll finish it because it is knit at a larger gauge. Pattern is 6mm needles, but I'm using 5.5. So yeah, overall, a nice relaxing project. This is the one that I pull out whenever I am watching TV, just evening knitting, just very relaxing. The next whip that I have, I'm very excited for. It is a test knit for Atelier Keston, and it is the Cognac sweater. I know I just mentioned in my knitting plans and intentions video that I was going to sign up for less test knits, but when I saw this design, I just really fell in love with it. I think it's super wearable, and I'm excited for that final finished object. So no regrets signing up for this test knit, but I did want to mention that because I know I said I was going to sign up for less. But yeah, this design I'm very excited for. So I would say Maureen is a relatively new designer. She has published 2 previous designs, and this is her first sweater or blouse design. The Cognac sweater has a contiguous set-in sleeve construction, which is kind of a blend between a drop shoulder and raglan construction. I'm really enjoying it so far. The suggested yarn in the pattern is Olivia and Oliver Fibers merino fingering, held together with Filcolana Tilia. I'm using Cascade Heritage, which is a sock yarn. It's 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon, and I'm holding it together with Filcolana Tilia. Similar to my Frankie Genser, this was yarn that I used in a previous project. I had knit the Soon sweater by November Knits with this yarn, but I just didn't really enjoy the fit of that sweater anymore. I realized that balloon sleeves are not really for me, like not really my style. They're fun to work up, but I just wasn't really wearing that sweater as much anymore, and I absolutely love working with Filcolana Tilia, and so I just thought it was kind of a waste being in a sweater that I never wear, so I ended up frogging that in the summer, and I just had the yarn ready for a future project. I thought it would work perfectly for this garment because this sweater uses a relatively low meterage. So I have around 800 meters of the Cascade Heritage, and I purchased this from a Etsy seller online, Shirley Baxter Knits, who I think closed their Etsy shop. But I'm pretty sure the yarn was like an older dye lot as well, because when I received the yarn, the Cascade Heritage packaging has changed from that design. So I knew that if I were to go out and purchase this shade Camel again, the dye lots probably would have changed because this yarn is definitely at least a few years old. So I was happy to come across this new design because it's knit on such a large gauge 6mm needles. You do need a pretty low meterage to knit a entire sweater or blouse. So for my size, I'm knitting the size 3, which has a finished bust of, I think, around 102 centimeters. You need around 700 meters of yarn, and I have 800 meters of that Cascade Heritage, so I figured this is going to be the perfect project for it. So let's chat a little bit about the construction, because I'm really enjoying how the contiguous set-in sleeves are working out. So you first cast on the back panel here, and then you shape the back with short row shaping to get that nice sloped fit at the back for your shoulders. Then you pick up stitches to knit the 2 front panels, and I would say they're like pretty short front panels. The garment sits pretty high up. Before you join the work all the way around, it's kind of hard to explain, so I'm gonna try and do my best. But you have your back panel, you have your front panel, and then you're picking up stitches along the side here for the sleeve. And then you pick up and knit the back panel stitches. Then you do the same, you pick up stitches along here for the sleeve. And then you cast on stitches at the front to join the work. And then you are working short rows for the neckline. I will say that it is a little bit fiddly to work up because you just newly casted on those stitches and you're working short rows on those cast on stitches. And at the beginning, I was like, I don't really know why we're doing this when we could just be doing that with increases, like in, I think, typical drop shoulder construction sweaters. You usually can shape the neckline with short rows before joining in the round. But when I was talking to a few of my friends that are also test knitting this, Maggie and Tar was saying that the short rows are probably to create a nice rounded neckline. And I was like, oh, that's a very good point. Because I would say that this sweater has a really nice rounded neckline, and that I think is achieved through doing the short rows. So even though it's a little bit fiddly to work up, it's totally worth it to get that nice rounded edge. So I've reached the point where I finished working the short rows, and now I'm just working in the round. So my most favorite part of working a top-down construction, the yoke, and I'm just knitting in the round and increasing for the sleeves. There's also going to be increases later on, I think, to also shape the armhole and the body as well. So I still have a ways to go with this sweater. The deadline is early February, but since it's knit at such a large gauge on 6mm needles, I'm sure I'm gonna get through this pretty quickly. In just a few nights, I'll be ready to split for the body, the sleeves, and I'll be done before I know it. There's 2 options for the neckline. I haven't decided yet which one I'm going to do, but the pattern sample that Maureen has knitted is twisted rib, but I think she's working on her second sample now that's going to show the I-cord finishing. I'm leaning towards doing I-cord finishing because I really like the look of my Cumulus blouse with the I-cord around the neck and the sleeve, so I'm leaning towards that one, but haven't fully committed yet. I might do that a little bit later once I knit a little bit more of the yoke in order to give myself some time to decide and just kind of figure it out a little bit more which one I want to do. But I would say most of the testers have done a twisted rib, and I'm really liking how that's looking. So it's kind of convincing me to do twisted rib, but my initial plan was to do the I-cord. And now moving on to some acquisitions. This is the first podcast since the holiday season, so I did acquire some knitting related gifts from friends and family, and a few of them are to help me with my sock knitting journey. So I had asked for some needles that are going to work for sock knitting, so I got the CaMaRose red lace circular 40-inch cable knitting needles in the size US 1 or 2.25 millimeter needles, which from what I understand at looking at patterns seems to be the most common knitting needle size for fingering weight socks. Pending I achieve gauge with these needles, I think this is going to work really well because you can knit, I think, an entire sock with just a magic loop method compared to if you're working like small circulars. So I figured I would give it a shot. Personally, I don't really like working magic loop. I always get laddering on the sides, and I just find it like just not an enjoyable knit, not as intuitive as knitting small circulars or even double pointed needles. So we'll see. I'm gonna give it a chance because I know it's quite popular and it makes the sock project more portable. But yeah, this is the first thing to help me with my sock knitting. I was also gifted from family the Charming Colorwork Socks book by Charlotte Stone. And yes, I did ask for this sock book, having not knit a pair of socks before. But I saw Charlotte on the Fruity Knitting podcast. They had interviewed her about this book that she wrote, and the way that she was explaining a lot of the patterns in the book and her, I guess, ethos around sock knitting and colorwork sock knitting is she tries to design these motifs to only work with 2 colors at a time at most with color work, and to create really like striking and graphic color work pieces. So I was really attracted to the book, and there was a copy of it at my local bookstore. So I was just flipping through the book and seeing all the patterns, and I got really excited because there are a few in here that I really like. Like, of course, the one on the cover is so stunning, but like this, oh, I probably shouldn't show that too much, but maybe the cover photo. The spicy socks, I think that's so fun. So there were a lot in here that I actually would knit and I really liked. So yeah, I have a ways to go before I can probably attempt to knit these, maybe knit like a pair of plain vanilla socks before starting with this. But Charlotte did mention in that Fruity Knitting podcast that some of these socks have been knit by beginner sock knitters before. So I'm excited to give this a go. And yeah, it's really inspired me to start sock knitting. And as I mentioned in my last video, my intentions video, I've clearly committed to sock knitting with all the materials at the ready. So I will be giving this book a shot sometime this year. And the last acquisition, which was also a gift, is another pattern book. This is the Sandnes Garn DIY 2302 pattern booklet. It has the stunning Vienna blouse on the cover. And I initially saw this, I think they might have released it in the spring of last year. I initially saw this pattern booklet released then, and I loved quite a few of the designs in this booklet. So I was always looking forward to possibly getting this booklet in the future. But as I mentioned in the past, Sandnes Garn only publishes their patterns in a physical booklet, which is a little bit difficult to source being here in Canada. There wasn't a retailer or outlet in the Greater Toronto area that had this booklet stocked, at least that I was aware of. So when I had purchased my last pattern booklet, I purchased it from Knit Yarns in the UK. But there's now a retailer, Gelt House of Yarn, which is in Cambridge, which isn't that close to Toronto, but at least a lot more accessible. They carry Sandnes Garn pattern booklets. So I'm really excited for this book and all the patterns in it. I'll share a few of them that really interest me. There was the Vienna blouse here, which I think is so stunning in the sunny lime color. There's the Abby Genser, which I had already mentioned, I already referenced for my Frankie Genser. And the last pattern that really attracted me to this pattern booklet was the River Cardigan, which is all over cabled, pretty long cardigan. So really excited for that one too. So I'm really excited to dive into these pieces. I have yarn that I have in mind for the Vienna blouse, which I think is going to be perfect. It's a bright pink magenta fuchsia color. So yeah, having this pattern booklet in my possession makes me really excited to get started on that project. And that was everything for podcast episode number 5. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching. I know there are a few new subscribers that came from my Everything I Knit in 2023 video, so probably shouldn't have saved this until the outro, but thank you so much for subscribing to my channel. It really means a lot to me that you want to stick around on my knitting journey and hear all of my thoughts and ramblings about my projects. But yeah, just wanted to say a huge thank you. And I'm looking forward to what's to come in the new year. Hopefully I will be back soon with the next podcast, because my 2 whips that I have right now, I think I can finish them quite quickly, and I'd be excited to start knitting more of my winter knitting plans. So yes, stay tuned, and I'll see you in my next one.